with this slide deck. So no need for you to take notes or screenshots as we go through. You will get a copy of this slide deck as we go on. Next slide. So our first thing we want to do is really ground ourselves in this work together by greeting one another and welcoming one another, touching base as you come into this session. So we're going to go to breakouts with about 5 people. You will be reconnecting with these people throughout the evening. I apologize. So we ask that you introduce yourself, share your school and your role. And then one thing that captures your attention when you walk into any garden, what stands out to you? Just share verbally one thing that stands out in your garden. So we are going to start the breakouts. All right. And we're going to be in the breakouts for around 10 minutes. So you should have plenty of time to introduce yourselves and touch base. Rooms are open. There's something that attracts you when you first walk into a garden, and you'll certainly have time to reflect on that as the evening goes on. Next slide. And we first want to also ground ourselves in the Portrait of a Graduate attributes. So tonight you are coming to the learning in a different place than you were this morning or the last after school special or the last training that you went to. And so take some time to reflect on yourself as a learner and try and put all of the day's happenings and goings on and everything you have to do after this training and really give yourself the time to be a passionate learner and be excited to be here with your colleagues. And choose one of these attributes that you can ground yourself in this evening as a learner. And at the end, during our exit ticket, you'll have a chance to reflect on which one of these you really used and how it helped you learn. So we'll give you about 30 seconds just to think through that. All right, next slide. I am excited to introduce Karen Taylor, our school support specialist and also master gardener extraordinaire. You will not find me ever running an after school special on gardening. I am really excited to learn alongside you tonight. And so Karen will be guiding us through the learning. Karen.
Thank you, Chrissy. I am as excited as you are to be here. This is my jam. Anybody who knows me knows that's true. And you kind of stole my thunder talking about the upcoming spring season, and all of you are probably noticing the longer days. And we are officially past the point of the solstice, and we are actually moving, I'm going to say barreling right towards spring. We passed the midpoint between the solstice and the equinox. So I'm hoping you are all starting to think about your what's going to be happening in your gardens this spring. And I'm going to spend just a little bit of time before we jump into the theme gardens and just review some of the spring garden basics. And just remind you too that we do have a garden guide available to everyone. And so more details for planning and maintaining those gardens can be found in that document. The Get2Green leaders should have a hard copy of it. And for other people who are not Get2Green leaders, you can access that document on our Schoology website under the Garden Resources folder. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of toss this out there and talk about considerations for a new garden. And a new garden doesn't necessarily only have to be one that you've never planted in before. It can be one that you're going to be planting in, renewing your garden for the season. So some of these may not really apply to you, but it's always a good idea to take into account how much sun you're getting in the planting space, what the drainage is like, because some of that may have altered depending on what you've had in your garden before. But I really want to focus on some of the things that are towards the bottom of the list because that can also be changing as you are beginning to use your outdoor spaces more and you're sharing them with more people. So paying attention to who is going to be using your garden, when you're going to be using your garden, especially who is going to be caring for that garden throughout the growing season. And then this last point, which is who and how will you choose what to plant? And that is going to be kind of the predominant feature when it comes to creating theme gardens. And you can go ahead to the next slide, please. So on this slide, I want to draw your attention to the picture there with those lovely raised garden beds. Some of you may have them at your school or will have them soon. And you'll notice that there's nothing planted in them right now. And that may seem a bit daunting to some of you and trying to think of what are we going to do with all of this planting space. I, on the other hand, look at it and say, oh my goodness, there's a great blank canvas out there just waiting to have something new created in it. So I want to reassure you that you don't have to worry. There are plans in place for providing you with some ideas for what to plant in those beds, particularly if you're looking at putting in some more permanent plantings. And there will be some guidance very, very shortly, but also encouraging you to leave some of that space available to plant something new each year, whether it's going to be herbs or annuals or vegetables. So you want to be getting an idea of how you're going to divide up that planting space. And again, it goes back to thinking about who is going to be using it. In the meantime, if you are not going to be planting, and this could be, as I said, it could be daunting. You don't have to do this all at once. You can do a section at a time. And if you are not going to be planting, as always, you've probably heard this mantra before, cover your soil, put down a tarp, put down some cardboard, or plant a cover crop to kind of ensure that the weeds are not going to take over. Because I can tell you, I'm a gardener too, there's nothing more discouraging than having to just constantly be weeding and not enjoying planting some other items. So in the spring, if you, and that's what I would advise doing if you haven't come up with any plans yet. If you are going to be planting, and if you have planted several times in the past, this is a good time to do a soil test. And also start thinking about any garden cleanups you're going to be doing in late April or May. And thinking about how you're going to schedule around all of the other things that you're going to have to do this spring. And if you don't get around to planting vegetables, that's okay. You can start thinking about what you want to plant when you come back to school. You have a whole season ahead of you that you can take advantage of those planting spaces. And you can go to the next slide. So rather than getting all stressed out about that space, we're going to move into doing something a little bit more fun and creative. And like I said, I want to assure you, I'm available to you to come and visit you at your school if you need ideas or you're really kind of struggling with where to begin. So just put that out of your mind for now and start thinking about some of the things that you can incorporate into your garden. So we're going to do a little bit of an exploration. Okay, next slide, please. So on this slide, we have a couple of pictures of gardens, and I'm just going to have you scan them for a second or two and just think about what caught your eye right away. What you notice, and just maybe pop into the chat and add a word or a phrase that speaks to you about any one of them or all of them. Well, I see color is definitely at the top of the list. Great. No weeds. There's no such thing as a garden that has no weeds. I'll assure you on that one. Welcoming, nice, inviting spaces, wonderful. Colors and patterns, great. Okay, well, we can move on to the next slide and start thinking about how we define a theme garden. I really loved to hear all of the things that were popping into the chat, the things that you were noticing, how plantings were arranged. Perhaps, well, the color really stood out. Anybody notice some of the other elements aside from the plants that were incorporated into any of these garden spaces that were not plants that maybe gave them a bit of personality? Using your walkways, right? Using tires as planters. Yep. So the thing about a theme garden, and I want to dispel this notion that a theme garden has to be your whole garden. It can be a portion of your garden. It can be just one bed. It could be a part of a bed. The point that I'm trying to make is that a theme garden is really putting a narrower focus on what you're planting. And it zeroes in on specific plants or elements to fit that theme. So if you think back on what you just saw, and people notice that rainbow garden, it was just a portion of a garden. It was not the entire garden. The other thing that I want to share too is that you can look at the gardens you have and you can consider them as multi-purpose when it comes to a theme. So perhaps you have a pollinator garden. What elements could you add into that to also make it a sensory garden? So you don't have to start from scratch with any of these. You can work with what you already have. Let's see, what slide are we on? The other thing is that you're still going to be taking into account with those theme gardens the same basic concepts that we talked about earlier in terms of light exposure, space, who's going to be using and caring for the garden. But once you kind of think of the theme, then you can start organizing your plants and whatnot around that. And you also want to be thinking too about what you are doing in your garden. Theme gardens also are about what you do, what activities you can incorporate into that space. So when I mentioned some of the gardens that you might have, these are common gardens in our school spaces. We have pollinator gardens, we have herb gardens, we have vegetable gardens. What would it take? What elements could you add to move your pollinator to something that had a literary theme and became some sort of a reading garden or a garden with a book theme? So you see this little drawing or painting that's on a walkway, and I'm sure you all know what book that is from, but it incorporates the alphabet on it. And that can be something that is in a pollinator garden because, of course, that's what that book was about. With the herb garden, there is no signage in this garden. It's lovely, but I would venture to guess that some of those herbs are culinary herbs. And what would it take to make that a more interesting space? Perhaps a sign that says something about where the origins of those herbs, where they came from, what you use them in. And then, as I said earlier, you can just take smaller parcels and create a small theme garden within what you already have. So say you have a vegetable garden, here's a grow bag. You can put that right in the middle of your vegetable garden and just dedicate it to a salsa garden and have just a few things in it. So those are just a couple ideas of how you can take what you already have and incorporate a theme around it. Okay, and the next thing. And here is this is low hanging fruit, everybody. Creating a theme with signage. There are so many ways to use signage to create a theme in a garden you already have. And here are some great examples. But basically what your signage is doing is it's one or all three of these things. It's inviting, or it's instructing, or it's informing your visitors into your garden. And it can highlight a theme and bring attention to visitors as to what to look for or the activities that they can do when they are there. So once you decide on a theme, think about what kind of sign you can incorporate into it to really have someone who enters into the space like, oh, wow, I can do this here. Oh, wait, oh, there's a sign here. Let me see if I can find in the garden what this sign is telling me is in bloom. So there's where all of your activities are going to get incorporated. And ideas for signage just run the whole gamut. I mean, you can start with something as simple as the plant's common name and the scientific name, or perhaps using signage in other languages. Information on the origins or the cultural significance of the plants in your garden. Those are fascinating to research, and they're wonderful little nuggets for your students to learn about. It just makes the garden such a much more interesting place. The other thing too, especially with pollinator gardens, is to point out interesting plant features and who depends on those plants for food and reproduction and shelter. I mean, we do that with the monarch and milkweed, but think about all the other plants that you may have in your garden. You have lots of visitors coming, hopefully, if you have different plants there. So it'd be nice to incorporate some signage to point out some of the visitors that you have. Okay, you can go to the next one. The other thing, and that's why I was asking earlier if anybody had noticed any of the physical elements in the garden. So you can include lots of non-living elements, and some of these are from schools in our district. Using all kinds of materials, just ways to use them creatively. You can use architectural or garden elements like trellises. Think about the pots that were in that earlier picture, how they were just stacked on top of one another, with the top one having a plant growing out of it to just look like hair. And you immediately get the idea that, oh, there's a pot person sitting on a bench here. It's just fun and whimsical, and it makes it just a delightful place to visit. Just think of it as ways to decorate your garden. And these decorative and informational items, they do not have to be complex or expensive. And I guarantee you, if you gave your students some time to come up with ideas, they would have a million of them. So in this picture, go back 1 second. Oop. Okay, so in the center there, this is just some simple game table. And these are students using pumpkins that they grew in the garden to play tic-tac-toe with. And the weather station is another great one to get your students outside and doing observations. And it's also something that is very STEAM related as well. And the garden on the other side, you may not be able to see it as well, but the signage there have animals on them. And all of the plants in that garden have animal names. And they have the ladybug there as a structure or a sculpture that cues you into what to look for in that garden. Okay, now to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to take a minute or two to start looking at some of the resources. There are so many ideas that you can explore, and it's really a matter of what your students' interests are, what you already have, what you want to create. There are lots of resources available, but we're just going to take a couple of minutes to share with you some of the resources we found, and just give you time to take a look at them. There are some that will give you some idea of some curriculum connections. There are some that have some design elements in them. So I think we have what, Chrissy, is about 10 minutes?
We're going to do about 8 minutes.
Pardon me?
We're going to do about 8 minutes.
Oh, 8 minutes. Okay. So to just, there's a slew of them. So you don't have to read them all. Some of them are very short. So pick 2 or 3 or whatever, and just spend a few minutes in your breakout groups going through them and thinking about the insights that you gain from looking at the resources. And I am sure there are people on this Zoom meeting tonight who have some of these elements in their garden. And I think that your colleagues would love to learn from you some of the things that you have incorporated.
All right, the rooms are open.
And that's true of sensory gardens too, but sensory gardens tend to be a little bit more stimulating. They are designed to stimulate all of your senses, and that is why they call them a sensory garden. So one is really more, I would say, calming. A sensory garden can be that way, but for some people, a sensory garden can actually be quite stimulating. So I just wanted to make that distinction. The other thing is in both of them too, they can include other items aside from plant materials, things like stones and sticks, gravel, access to water, tools to dig. Those are really common features of this type of garden. And next slide, please. And this one is kind of a fun one. I have had people request information on creating something like an alphabet garden. And I would challenge you to see if you could come up with 26 plant names. It's not as easy as you might think, but there is a way to do it. And my suggestion for anyone who is interested in exploring doing that type of garden is to consider using different types of plants and looking at it both from the lens of using a common name and a botanic name, using both annuals and perennials, and also incorporating things like vegetables and herbs. You'll probably find that you can easily cover 26 letters if you decide to incorporate all of those elements into it. Another one is just focusing on animals. Now, the picture on the lower left-hand corner shows just some animal heads or animal faces, but there are a lot of plants that have animal names, and it just makes for kind of a whimsical, fun thing to explore when you're out in the garden. Okay, next slide, please. And this is another one we hear talked about a lot. It's culinary gardens or a global spice garden. And it's doable, but you have to realize that some of the spices that may originate in other parts of the world that we commonly use in cooking are not particularly easy to grow in our climate. But there are ways to incorporate other things. You might include some other vegetables along with spices. And so I'd kind of maybe call it more a global culinary garden rather than a spice garden. And this is where I was talking about transitioning from having just purely an herb garden to having a global garden. And I want to point out that this kind of garden too, it's a great place for community to grow together because you have an opportunity to focus on different types of foods eaten by your students, and also a way to invite your community and to talk about the way that those foods are used in different cuisines. So it presents lots of really fun activities for your school community. Just some of the ideas, like you can do Asian, Mediterranean, South and Central American. There are plants and all of those traditions that will grow in our climate. And I want to just mention too, there is a wonderful website. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called kidsgardening.org. They have fabulous resources available to explore this topic. And there are some resources in the garden resources on the Schoology site. And the other thing that you can do in a garden like this too, if you were going to do a global garden, is to include the names of these plants in the languages in which they're commonly used, and perhaps including identification, where in the world they come from and how they got here and the types of foods that they're used in. And so we're going to move into speaking of a culturally themed garden. Move to the next slide. And I did see somebody mention that they did do a Three Sisters theme at their school. This is a great example of a theme garden. It doesn't have to be your whole garden. As I said, it could just be a portion of it. But it's part of our elementary curriculum, and it's a great example of companion planting, which is a type of interplanting where the plants are symbiotic and they benefit one another. And I'm just going to defer to this video because I think it's a really good synopsis. She does a great job of explaining it. And I'll just go ahead and let you play the video.
We're here at Sierra Harvest's Food Love Project. Behind me is a technique of planting called Three Sisters. We're going to show you how to do that today. Companion planting is a useful gardening technique where you plant certain veggies together to take advantage of their natural tendencies and relationships. This is a technique that's been practiced for centuries, and most famously with the Three Sisters planting. The Three Sisters is a combination of 3 plants working together. Sister beans deposit nitrogen from the air into the soil in a form that the plants can use. Plant pole beans such as Blue Lake, Scarlet Runner, or Italian Snap, not bush beans. Sister corn provides support for bean vines to climb upon. Plant your favorite. You can use sweet corn, dent corn, popcorn, or even a combination. And sister squash shades the ground with its large leaves to provide a good growing environment for all the sisters. Squash can be winter type or summer types or both. There are many variations on a Three Sisters garden layout, but all of them plant the sisters in clusters on low, wide mounds rather than in a single row. The Wampanoag method is best known because it was the planting method that the Iroquois taught the early colonial settlers. Other methods include the Hidatsa method, where each sister is planted in clusters on their own mounds, and the Zuni method, which is best for arid regions. The first thing is to find a location with at least 6 hours of full sun every day. The soil should be full of organic matter and weed-free. We're going to build a mound, which we're going to plant the Three Sisters in. Build each mound so that it is 4 inches tall, 18 inches in diameter at the base, with a flat top that is about 10 inches across. Space mounds so their centers are 4 feet apart. You can start your garden when the nighttime temperatures reach at least 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but not any later than June 1st. We're going to plant the corn on the flat part of the mound with 6-inch spacing. And you don't want to plant the other seeds until the corn is about knee-high. You can also transplant the corn to get a head start, and then plant the seeds for the squash and the beans at the same time as you plant the transplants. If you coat your bean seeds with an inoculant before planting, you'll fix nitrogen in the soil, and that will benefit all of the sisters. Here at Food Love Project, the kids actually planted the Three Sisters, and they used flags to mark where their seeds went. Sometimes a fourth sister is included, either a sunflower or bee balm or amaranth. This sister also supports the beans, lures the birds away from the corn with their seeds, and attracts insect pollinators. This Three Sisters mound is about a month old, and it's a perfect example of having 4 to 5 corn stalks in the middle with the fourth sister as an amaranth. The beans have been planted, they're going to get started, and they're going to start growing up the corn and the amaranth, and now we're going to plant the squash. Planting the beans a few weeks after the corn ensures that the corn stalks will be strong enough to support the fast-growing beans. We're planting the squash now that the beans are about 6 inches tall. Spacing should be about 18 inches apart. For a mound this size, that means about 5 squash plants. You might want to put 2 seeds in each hole, just in case you don't get 100% germination. And they go around the perimeter of the mound. Plant your Three Sisters garden, which is companion planting at its best, and grow organic for life.
Okay, I hope everybody enjoyed watching that. I particularly enjoyed the fact that she introduced some other plants that you can incorporate into that that serve the same purpose, like as the cornstalk. So, and amaranth is a wonderful plant to grow if you haven't. It's very interesting. I wanted to point out that every garden is a STEAM-themed garden. This is where, when earlier I talked about activities that you do in the garden can determine what the theme is. There are lots and lots of activities that lend themselves to design and engineering, plant science. In this picture, we have some students who worked on creating these trellises. It was a project that they did for one of their classes. And in that, it actually was in that same cohort, we had some students who designed some plant stakes and incorporated QR codes to be placed out in the garden, and had all of the planting information or whatever other information about the plants were incorporated on it. So there's lots of ideas that you can use to do STEAM activities out in your garden. Also, designing the garden is a great STEAM activity. Figuring out how to optimize light and space, tracking your plant growth, using measurements and data analysis, all by teaching concepts like life cycles and ecosystems, and even basic geometry. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And this one I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on too, because we have so many schools that have pollinator gardens. And I have it, the title saying pollinative and native species garden. I really want to focus on the idea that those two are so intermingled. Many of our school gardens have been engaged in planting milkweed, which is a native plant, but the purpose behind planting that milkweed often is to support the life cycle of the monarch. But anyone who's planted milkweed and spent some time searching for those monarch eggs and larvae knows that the milkweed plant supports a host of other organisms, creating a whole community out there. And so if you add in some additional plants that focus on Virginia natives, you're not only going to increase the biodiversity of the plants in your garden, that's ultimately going to lead to a diversity of pollinators that visit, especially when you consider the seasonality of the plants and planning on planting things that are going to provide nectar and pollen sources throughout the growing season. And it's true, if you plant it, they will come, and in short order too. It's a very exciting thing to watch happen. So I encourage people to do some exploration of the native plants that you can incorporate into your gardens. Okay, next. So native and pollinator gardens are excellent learning tools. There are so many things that you can explore out there, everything from observing pollinator activity, looking at the diversity of pollinators, plant diversity, plant adaptations, flower function, watching how which pollinators visit which flowers and how that is related to the structure of the flower, looking at life cycles, and ethnobotany, which is one of my favorite topics to explore. And that is really looking into how indigenous people used native plants for things beyond just food, but for medicine, for building materials, for dyes, for clothing. And it's just a fun thing to explore with your students, and recognizing that our native plants have many, many uses and continue to do so today. So back to having a healthy pollinator garden, we really need more than just one type of plant. And I love this little graphic. I think it's so lovely. It just demonstrates the different types of flowers that are native to our area and the range of pollinators that you will definitely see if you incorporate them into your garden. So I really encourage you to grow a host of different host and nectar plants. And I know this group is probably well aware of the fact that we want to try and avoid invasive species. The other thing that's going to really help you attract pollinators into your garden is to cluster your plants rather than plant them one here, one there. It makes it easier for pollinators to access them. They don't have to expend as much energy when they're gathering nectar. And the other thing that you want to try and do is to leave some bare ground in your garden so that you allow for some puddling, because pollinators need access to water and moisture. And as I said, I want to emphasize that you want to do this, you want to provide plants throughout the growing season. And I think sometimes we forget that there are plants, the pollinators, especially our native bees, we're going to be emerging soon, and there's not necessarily a whole lot in bloom. So doing a little research and looking at the kinds of plants you can provide in early spring, and also those plants that are going to be blooming late in fall, particularly as pollinators are either starting to migrate or are reproducing and building nests for the winter. So it's a great thing to be thinking about doing some sort of timeline to figure out which plants you can place in your garden. And on that note, with those raised beds that many of you have, this is exactly the plans that I'm getting put together for you, because you want to be able to plant things that within a bed are not going to be too aggressive. They're going to be heat tolerant, and they're not going to get too tall. And that's sometimes with our native plants, they do get very tall and they may not necessarily be appropriate for a raised bed. So I'm going to try and take some of that guesswork out of it for you, but you're welcome to do the research as well. And I think you'll be really pleased with the results. Go to the next slide, please. And here's just a list of some other ideas for themed gardens. I love this picture. It's just a patch of wildflowers, and you'll see a series of paintings. It's kind of based on Monet's garden, and it's just 3 colors. It's white and yellow and blue, and it's a beautiful effect. And clearly someone had students out there doing some artwork. And there are just a whole range of different ideas. This is just a small cross-section of themes that you can incorporate into your garden. I'm really curious about some of the history themed or garden period gardens. There's lots of ways to incorporate those too. I think about the potato and the role of the potato that has played in historically from the time that it was grown in South America and how it managed to work its way into cultures around the world. So those are ways to incorporate history into some of the things you might grow in your garden. And it's back to you, Chrissy.
Yeah, and Kim, if you want to stop sharing to play with the screen a little bit while I talk about the Eco Schools program and then reshare. Oh, and I get to see everyone's faces, which is so much better. Hey, everybody. So if you are not familiar with the National Wildlife Federation's Eco Schools program, they are one of our major partners in helping direct the environmental stewardship work that you're doing with schools. More than half of our schools in Fairfax County are incorporating National Wildlife Eco Schools program into what they're doing, and they have Eco Schools cards. And so if you decide to use this program to both guide your work and also to help you get recognition for the great things that are already happening at your schools, then you can use one of the 56 Eco Action cards. And many of them now revolve around this idea of gardening, of planting pollinator gardens, of planting and maintaining gardens. They added ones this year too that they recognize you might have planted it in the past, but setting up a plan to now go back and take care of that garden is part of it. There could be, you might have a plan. We saw so many whimsical elements in these themed gardens. So if you create wildlife homes or you're feeding birds, those are 2 separate cards in the National Wildlife Eco Schools program. And so really taking stock, sometimes it can feel overwhelming to fill out the paperwork and get into that program. But many of you, when we talk to you about what you're doing, you're already doing the work. And so it's just matching up the Eco Action card with the work that you're planning or already doing. And so on this slide, when Kim has the chance to reshare it, you'll see some that are specific to themed gardens that would fit in really well. Planting a garden is something that you're hoping to do at your school. This can be some of the cards that you use. So the rain garden, if you have students going out and just observing at different times throughout the year, that's part of the first grade curriculum, to adopt a tree and see what it happens over the year. But many of you are doing that with your green teams, or even with your classes for the first 5 minutes of recess, taking them out and picking your class's spot to just sit and take in the nature around you. That would go under the sit spot. And Karen talked about the things that you can plant, and many of you in the chat had great ideas for increasing that biodiversity on your school campus. So we want everyone to be recognized. Last year, we, as a district, earned 22 green flags. And so we're hoping to increase that even more, or even just have more people enter at that participant level. Just do 1 card and really get going and using these Eco Action cards to direct your work. All right, next slide.
Okay, so we're going to have a little time to dig into our one of our latest resources that we created, the FCPS Focused Garden Guide, Together We Grow. And I just wanted to take a minute to explain to you how this came into being. It did not happen overnight, I can assure you of that. But being tasked with putting together some guidance for people interested in having school gardens really required some time to think about how you all encounter gardens with your students. And I worked with a lot of people on it, but one of my main things that I wanted to focus on is that I wanted to recognize that a lot of people had little knowledge or maybe had some trepidation about getting involved in the gardens with their students. And I wanted to provide information to them that would encourage them and give them the support they needed to get started. The other thing about the garden guide is in the process of determining what should be included in it, I spent a lot of time looking at garden guides from other school districts in our area and also in different areas around the country just to see how they were laid out, the sorts of things that they included in them. And one of the things that dawned on me is that we have a lot of different types of gardens on school grounds. Many garden guides really focus exclusively on growing edibles, having vegetable gardens. And while that's great, and we want to encourage that, and it's a wonderful activity to get involved in, we have lots of other types of gardens as well. And those garden guides do not necessarily address that. So each of our Get2Green leaders has received a hard copy of this document, as I said earlier, but it is also available on the Get2Green website in Schoology under the garden resources. And I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to explore it, but it is a tool for you to use. Does it have everything under the sun? Absolutely not. It just wouldn't be possible to incorporate everything, but it does have the basics to get you started and to lead you down the road. And if you have questions, there are other resources, myself included, available to you to answer your questions. So we're going to take a little bit of time this evening just to explore it. And I wanted to focus on just one section and have you just spend a little time looking at the sections on sensory and pollinator gardens and look at the resources that are available just to give you a taste of what's in there and what to expect when you create that type of garden. You're also welcome to explore anything else in it you'd like to, but I did want to focus on those two. And the main reason was in those sections, there are tables and explanations of not only plants, but pollinators that you might see in your garden. And I especially wanted to include that because sometimes I think some of our native pollinators are overlooked and they are just as beautiful and just as important as the monarch. So cueing your student body and your community into just the wonderful wealth of diversity we have right outside our doorstep is part of the reason why I included those in the garden. So in the garden guide. So anyway, I think we have
about 10 minutes.
Okay, and we have the link there. So you are welcome to get started and we'll check back with you in a few minutes. And if you hadn't looked at the garden guide, that it intrigues you to look a little bit more deeply. I also want to point out that, as I said, does it include everything? No, and probably we will be including things as we journey through gardening together in the future. But there are a lot of very, very good resources in the resource section in the back of it with links to getting additional information if you want to dive a little bit more deeply. And I guess that is
in the chat.
Yeah.
If you can go back up one, Rachel.
Oop.
So not Rachel, Kim. If Kim, you can go back up one, and Rachel
Okay.
dropped in the chat. If you can redrop that question in the chat.
Okay.
How might they use the garden guide as a tool for your themed garden?
Hmm. I'm just looking at the statements about corn. You know, there are smaller varieties of corn that you can plant that don't get too, just like you can plant smaller varieties of sunflowers, there are smaller varieties of corn so it doesn't get too out of control. And it also, some of those smaller varieties, you get an earlier harvest on them too. Oh, I see we have some seed savers on here too. Mhm. Mhm.
And then whenever you're ready, you can move on to the questions.
Okay. Now it's your turn. I see lots of great suggestions in the chat and lots of great sharing. And I'm always interested to hear more about what's been successful in your gardens. I mean, that's what makes gardening so much fun, is just learning from each other. And there's never an end to it, for sure.
So Karen, do you want to start with live questions or do you want to go to a couple that were in the chat?
Either way, either way. I went back to see, I don't know, Donna, I wasn't able to go through all of it. Did you see anything specifically?
Yes. So
Can I ask a quick question, Karen?
Sure.
Okay, so in our group, we were talking about the native bees, encouraging native bees.
Yeah.
And is that encouraged? As I remember at one point a while ago, it was not as encouraged because people are fearful of bees.
Oh,
But
you're
you know
you're
now-
talking to the right person.
I know, and I love bees too, but can we make those little like bee hotels kind of thing, or is
No.
that discouraged?
Don't do it.
Don't
And I'll
do
tell
it.
you what.
Okay, that's what
So,
I want to know.
no, yeah, I know that that's kind of looked at, oh, that'd be a fun activity. So, just to let you know, I do a bee talk, and I will be happy to come to your school
I heard the rumor,
and
yeah.
talk about it. And honestly, one of the reasons I enjoy doing it so much is because there is a real emphasis on native bees. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what's happening out there in the bee world. And there is a very big distinction between our native bees and the honeybees, which is what most people think of when they think of bees, but they have completely different habitats. And our native bees do not, they're solitary for the most part, and they do not live in hives.
Or
So
sting or
where
bite.
they
Or
go,
sting or bite,
and
right?
most of the native bees, by far, I'd say probably 70% of them or so, nest in the ground. So they will not build a nest in a bee hotel. But the reason that that's being discouraged really is because they take maintenance also, and they tend to promote some parasitic diseases and whatnot. And so you don't want to run the risk of actually causing a problem that you're trying to help. You know, you're trying to help the bees and actually doing something that could be harmful. So the best thing to do in terms of enhancing the habitat is doing just that, is enhancing the habitat naturally, providing those elements where bees are going to nest. And honestly, I hear you when you talk about people being nervous and afraid and you know, anxious around bees. And that's one of the reasons I like to talk about it, because I think when people become a little bit better informed about it, they get more intrigued than afraid. And we certainly do need to encourage more bee populations or the bee population expanding. We do have a number of native bees that are actually very threatened. And the other thing that's happening with honeybees now too is there's been such an increase in interest in having hives and whatnot. And I don't mean to discourage anybody from doing that, but you have to be mindful of where these hives are, how many there are in your area, because what's happening is the honeybees, which are generalist pollinators, they will compete for food from our native bees, many of which only will go to certain flowers. So I know that's a lot, but I hope it answers a little bit some of your question.
It definitely does, because I just didn't know there's other way besides not raking, besides all those basics about leaving the ground a nice habitat for the
Right.
ground, for the native bees.
Mhm.
Whether we were allowed to
Well, you do want to encourage them to be, I mean, that's the whole
without a
point.
doubt. I'd love to have a healthy, bee population, native bee population in a little
Right.
garden. But
And
I think,
go
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't know how much space to really, because right now we're just starting with, we have a little tiny space, and then we're doing garden planters. Sorry. Sorry. So I didn't know how much space they were actually needed to do that, encouraging, whether they need a lot of
Not
space
a
and they don't
lot,
care.
you'd be
They're
surprised.
solitary, so.
Yeah. Well, and I would really encourage people before too long, I would say probably in another month or so, you may see bees emerging from their nests in the ground. And you'll see them very low to the ground. And it's actually a wonderful thing. They're not out to cause you harm. They're looking for food. And one of the things that happens is we cover a lot of our spaces up with mulch, and they may be nesting there already and now they can't emerge. So it's just that kind of awareness. They're doing what they do, and we just need to be mindful of what we're doing in their habitat areas. So,
And that we wish that we could clone Karen, but she does have this wonderful bee discovery cart that she can come out and teach the students the importance of bees and like not to be fearful of them. So keep that on the back of your mind for future. And I do have one question related to Rhonda asked if in regards to the predatory wasps mentioned, do they eat cabbage worms?
oh, I don't know if they eat cabbage worms, but they, predatory wasps, I'd have to look to see what specifically they will prey upon, but it's a beneficial insect. And a lot of these beneficial insects are out there, getting rid of the things that are more harmful for sure. But off the top of my head, I don't know if that's what it preys upon.
Thank you
And
for
then
dinner.
there's another question that Allie answered in the chat, but I think it's worth mentioning to everyone was talking about fruit trees and facilities rules about planting fruit trees.
Okay, well, I don't know if Allie mentioned it or answered it in the chat, but
Allie
fruit
said,
trees-
Allie
yeah.
said,
Okay, what did Allie say?
fruit trees aren't permitted by facilities due to issues with pests and maintenance.
Right. And that is correct. And I know that there's an interest in growing fruit, but honestly, fruit trees do take a lot of care, and that's one of the reasons why it's discouraged. They require very specific types of conditions in order to bear fruit, and the maintenance of it, you have to have somebody around who's going to harvest it, and that's just not practical on our school grounds for the most part. And so when you have dropping fruit lying around, that's when you start having problems with things like wasps or yellow jackets, which are wasps. So they want to discourage that. And, I'm going to just riff off of that really quickly too. I know a lot of schools have been planting berry vines, and that's fine. If you have raspberries and blackberries, blueberries are the easiest to maintain. They don't really take much maintenance at all. That's the easiest thing, and it's a native plant, so that's great. But berry vines do require maintenance. If you plant berry vines, they will take off and they will get tangled, and you'll have them growing all over. And unfortunately, they do not bear fruit on every cane. You have to thin them out because they will only bear fruit on the second year cane. So if you have berry vines laying around that they've been there for 3, 4, 5 years, they probably need to be thinned out.
And as a follow-up, Karen, I'm sorry, I didn't write your name down. If we already had mature ones, and I'm thinking it was Cynthia, if we already had mature ones, I'm thinking you're talking about fruit
Fruit
trees.
trees.
Must they be cut down?
I don't know that I would bring attention to it at this point, but if they are not looking healthy, and if they are not bearing fruit, or if they look like that they may be in decline or have some disease, I would have somebody from facilities come out and do an evaluation to see if it needs to be removed.
I'll add to that that generally they won't come and remove fruit trees unless they become an issue if they're already there, but they don't want new fruit trees planted.
Thanks for that clarification. And then I just have to say, Denise said, my third graders just harvested beautiful carrots yesterday. Coincidentally, it tied right into the current benchmark reading unit about coyote and rabbit. And the kids were thrilled. So we're hoping to do some summer curriculum to try to get a little more Get2Green into benchmark this summer. So thank you for sharing that. I'm really
Oh, that's
excited about
excellent.
that.
That's good news.
And then someone asked about if the seeds survive the winter. Carrots, bees, radish seem to do well in cold weather. Do these seeds survive winter?
So do you mean after they've been planted? I'm not clear about what the question is.
Eva, I'm sorry, that she said she planted them in November and hoping they will grow.
Given the winter we've had, I'm probably suspect about that, but I'm always of the mind, see what happens. I mean, we had a very mild winter last year, and I would have bet that they would have germinated and sprouted, but not so this year. I would wait, maybe when the soil warms up enough. The thing is, what I would think is, depending on when you planted them, if they started to germinate and we had that hard freeze, it probably would have killed it off.
Yeah, they were in the ground, so I didn't see, unless they germinated in the ground, then.
Yeah, the thing is, like I said, if we had a warm spell, because they germinate fairly quickly. So if they had put out their root and started to grow, but maybe you haven't seen the leaves starting to appear above the soil, it probably would have frozen that plant if it started to grow. But
Yeah, wait to
just
see.
wait and see what. And my advice to you too is just get out there and plant some more as soon as the soil is ready for it, which is going to be soon. Some of those cool weather plants you can plant probably, let's see, it's beginning of February. By mid-March, and radishes, you get a yield on those very quickly. So you can just try again. It's one of those learning things, and you know, there are just things that happen with the weather that it's just what happens. And we had an extremely cold snap for sure.
All right, I have it. And do we have time for more questions?
Yep.
Okay.
I think so.
Jessica Hooten asked, our garden is only part sun. Do you have lots of ideas for this? I love the Three Sisters partner plants idea.
Okay, part sun. When you say part sun, you have to really, a couple things to pay attention to is how many hours of sun you're actually getting, because part sun is usually less than 6 hours. You don't get into shade. Shade is like less than 4 hours. And what time of day? And you know, the thing is, paying attention to the sun and the angle of the sun at this time of year is kind of a fun thing to do too. Your garden may be in part sun now, but maybe as the season progresses, you'll be getting more sunshine, and that would be beneficial. I mean, most of those plants do benefit from having full sun. I'm not saying they won't grow, but you're probably not going to get as vigorous a growth as you would if you hadn't in full sun.
Right. We are going to have the green team students do a plotting of the sun 3 times in the day and have them track it. But from what I looked at last year, we get maybe part sun, like we're pushing it to say it's part sun. And then as soon as the trees come in, then we're going to mostly shade.
Yeah. So that's going to be kind of detrimental to growing that sort of thing. The other suggestion I would have, if you're really interested in just experimenting with Three Sisters is to plant it in a really large container and just see what you get out of it. And honestly, email me about it, because the other thing that I've offered to schools that don't have the ideal garden space in terms of doing container gardening, there are a lot of dwarf vegetable varieties that are great for containers, and there are smaller varieties of corn. And is it authentic in terms of what our indigenous people would have planted? No, we have varieties that they didn't, but corn, I'm telling you, there's so many varieties of corn, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But if the idea is for you to demonstrate that companion planting idea, there's ways to do it. So.
Okay, because the thought that the companion plants work together anyway is Three Sisters are fantastic to link in, but even if not, then any companion plants. But most of them are part sun to full sun, right?
Yeah, because that's going to be your vegetables, and vegetables definitely
Right.
are in that range of light
Okay.
requirement.
So
Mhm.
that's
Thank
all
you.
the time we have for questions, but I have a couple extra questions that we will answer in a follow-up. And if you have additional questions that we didn't get to, please go ahead and put them in your exit ticket. But we have really good ones about soil and that we will answer for you.
Okay, so there's a next slide, I believe.
Is. So our next slide is the part of the PD that most people really love best, and it's connecting with one another. And we really do listen to your feedback. And a lot of times, as much as you love being in a random breakout and meeting new people, you would like to touch base with others that share your same role. So for our last breakout in How Will Your Garden Grow?, we are asking how to share ideas for how themed gardens might work with your existing curriculum and goals. Like Denise shared with the carrots aligning nicely with benchmark, you might have other ways, and it doesn't have to be existing. It could be a dream that you've had about a themed garden. You're going to have about 20 minutes to touch base, and we're going to ask you to record your ideas in the slide deck. And there's so many of you, there's 2 separate slide decks. We will combine them all together. And when we share this slide deck on Schoology and in our follow-up email, all of the slides will be in there so you can take a peek into other people's ideas and roles. Because it is a self-selected room, we used the MyPDE registration to get a feel for how many people were coming from different roles. So when we open up the breakout room, you will see, for example, there are 5 rooms for pre-K through 2nd grade. Our hope would be that there would be no more than 5 or 6 people in a room. So as much as you're able, if you can shift yourself around, think about if we were in a big space, if we were on a cafeteria, if you could go to the table that needed more people, if you could go into a room that speaks to you for your role, and we might not have your role specifically, or many of you wear many hats at your school. So pick the one that you would like to focus on tonight. And we will open those rooms. And again, you'll have about 20 minutes. And Rachel just dropped into the chat the link. So you can figure out what room you're going to go to and then which slide deck you will need to use. So there are 22 rooms and several of them are repeats. And let me know if you need help. If you're having trouble joining a room, I can certainly assign you into the one that you're most interested in.
See, are we able to send somebody to a room or do
Yep.
they, okay, somebody asked in the chat if they could be
Yep.
sent to a
I
room.
just thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have no idea how to put myself in a room, and I feel like I
Laura,
should
what
know how
room
to
would
do that.
what do you teach?
I'm pre-K, so I can be 1 through 6. I think we're the ones for
Yeah,
pre-K.
I'm going to assign you to the one that has the lowest number right now, so you can lend your
Perfect.
voice.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hi, I teach second grade. Can you assign me to a room?
And this is Karen?
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Hi, you guys. It's Lauren.
Hey, I
I'm
was-
on my phone, so I can't get into a room. Will you put me in a high school room?
Absolutely.
Hi, I am in
Thank
elementary.
You guys are the best.
Elementary, can you put me in a room?
Absolutely,
Susanna, there's a counselors and family liaisons room. Would you,
Oh,
let's
okay.
put you there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi,
Yep.
Chrissy. Could you put me in a room with librarians or other people that teaches?
Yeah, I'm going to do, I did resource because there were only
Okay.
like 2 librarians, so I thought we could group you together.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
This is Jessica Hooten. Can I go in the 6th grade room, please?
Sure can. Would you rather be middle school or elementary?
We're in elementary school, so elementary.
Okay, I'll put you there.
Thank you.
Hi, Chrissy.
Kate-
Can you
Kate
put me?
Trimpton
I
also
don't know why I
asked.
can't figure this out. It's ridiculous. But can I have a whatever is lowest for pre-K to 6
Absolutely.
or whatever it is?
That's okay. I mean, we all
Well,
learn
seriously, I
here.
would like to. Why can't I went to the Google Doc, but that doesn't have anything to do with it.
No. It would be like down where you see the breakout rooms. They should have all popped up and you should see a list and you could just click join room.
Oh my gosh, okay. It's on me. I don't see it, but I will deal with that later. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Elizabeth
Beth, I'm-
Etherton also asked to go to pre-K with Jean Eubanks. And Kate Shrimpton asked to go to something else in the chat. There are people asking.
Yes, and I'm Jean Eubanks, and I clicked on those links and I can't get in either. So wherever you put
So the
Betsy,
links are just for
What-
recording, but I will put you in
oh,
pre-K
with
room,
Betsy,
Jean.
with Betsy, yes.
I can't see where Betsy. Well, I can. Let me look and see where Betsy is.
Oh,
All
okay.
right, let me see.
Etherton.
Betsy.
Etherton, yeah. She just asked.
Right, Etherton. I see where ended up.
Just send me there. I'm
And
sorry.
then Megan.
Yeah, because I don't see the link either. I apologize. Usually, thanks.
You're welcome. You should both be in room 1.
And then Megan said
Eva.
librarian. Yeah.
Eva's gonna go to high school.
Sent people to random places that I thought they belonged to.
Excellent.
Beth Chang says
Bing,
resource
bing.
room.
Yeah, she's
Okay,
already moved.
All right, everybody's out.
Alexis Beasley.
Oh, she's a middle school science teacher.
Okay. And I see Janice wants 5th grade. Well, Janice, do you want room 5 or 5th grade?
Room 5, please.
All right, here you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mary Shekels. Anybody know? Matthew Wallace, Rebecca Smith, and Tracy Saludo.
I think Rebecca and Tracy are listening with a group of 3 maybe together.
Okay.
Not positive.
And I have Matthew Wallace, Mary Shekels, and somebody on the phone that has not been able to join. Phone person, if you can talk and tell me what you teach, I can move you to the right breakout room, and that way it'll take you automatically. 561-676. I would have to just skip the area code to sing it. 6765042.
That was pretty.
Thanks. My backup career.
There was an SNL skit recently where they tried to make like a jingle out of a completely